In today's tier list, I will be ranking all 130 Lance units from S all the way down to Don't, based on how well they can use Rearmed Alfred's new Arcane Lance. This tier list will be a bit different than other tier lists because I will not be ranking the units based off their power or how good they are, but based off how well they can use this weapon. This tier list is not only to recommend heroes who use this weapon well, but also units who can use it poorly and shouldn't inherit the weapon. As this tier list has a massive amount of units, I will be breaking down all the units into movement types to make it easier to digest the information. You can find timestamps in the description down below if you want to find a particular unit you care about. Now let's quickly go over the criteria I use to rank these heroes. First is if the unit has access to preference skills, for example a hero like Flame Lin with Vindictive Decay. Heroes that have preference skills cannot equip their preference skill and this weapon, so it has less value on these units. Second, if the unit is due for a refine or will eventually get a refine in the future. Third, if the unit has already had their weapon refined, Intelligence Systems will most likely never add true re-refines, so this is a chance for those units to get a second life. Fourth, if the hero is a seasonal hero with no preference weapon, these units historically have never got preference weapons or refines, so this is their first chance at getting access to a preference weapon. Fifth, stat line. When you're looking at inheritable weapons, stat lines become a much bigger determining factor. Sixth, movement type. Different movement types have different skill availability, such as armored heroes having access to Hardy Fighter. Last, but most importantly, if you have a favorite unit you love, use it on them. Playing with your favorites is the most important factor. Screw the tier list, favorites are greater than meta. Now let's quickly go over Arcane Qiang so we can get a good understanding of its strength and weaknesses. Arcane Qiang has 5 main effects. First, cooldown reduction or slaying. Second, +5 to all stats. Third, a guaranteed follow-up attack. Fourth, follow-up denial. And fifth, the hero gets a dual phase breath effect. So special acceleration. But only if the hero or the foe move to space before combat. This is really important to remember. So the Arcane Lance is much less specialized than the past Arcane weapons. It's actually very versatile, and almost any Lance hero can make use of it, but the builds you use will be quite different depending on the movement type and the stat line of the hero. One of the major benefits of this weapon is its easy access to bigger specials. Due to the slaying and special acceleration, you can easily make use of 3 cooldown specials like Iceberg, Bonfire, or Luna, but you can also use 5 cooldown specials too, like Ether or Gale Force. Speaking of Gale Force, this weapon can be extremely good with Gale Force, but there is a caveat, and that is if you don't proc Gale Force on the first combat, and the hero needs to be danced to proc it, you have to move before your second combat. If you don't, you will not get the special acceleration. It probably won't be a problem most of the time, but I could see it messing up a few Gale Force clears. This weapon is pretty good on units of all kinds of different speed levels due to the guaranteed follow-up attack, but you have to remember the interaction between guaranteed follow-up attacks and follow-up denial. When the interaction happens, it will become a speed check. So if the attacker has 5 more speed than the defender, they will get their follow-up attack. But if the defender has 5 more speed than the attacker, then they will get their follow-up denied. This does mean that speed has a good amount of value on this weapon, as speedy units will get a pseudo no follow-up effect, while slower heroes might lose out on their follow-up attacks and follow-up denial. And this is where it can get a bit confusing, but a lot of that goes out the window when no follow-up is involved. And that's why this weapon has such a unique synergy with different movement types. For example, armors get a lot of good use of this weapon with Hardy Fighter, because Hardy Fighter offers defensive no follow-up, which means the only way to double them is to have no follow-up yourself and outspeed them. On the other hand, Cavalry and Flyers have easy access to offensive no follow-up via the flow skills, like Flow Guard, Flow Refresh, etc. So that means Cavalry or Flyers equipped with a flow skill cannot have their follow-up denied unless their opponent has no follow-up and outspeeds them. And then obviously Infantry are just dirty cheaters because they have easy access to full no follow-up. The important thing to take away from this is that I like this weapon on defensive armors, while I think it's better on offensive Flyers and Cavalry units. That does not mean that it's bad on other heroes, I just think it has really good synergy that way. Just remember to pay attention to the builds, because in order to unlock this weapon's full power, you need to use the proper specials and skills. Now let's get started with my Infantry tier list. Now remember, because this weapon is so versatile, the gaps between tiers really isn't as big. Speed is going to allow the hero to have a pseudo no follow-up, so it's going to be the stat we're looking at the most. Also, forewarning, Anna and female Chris are due for a refine within a year-ish, so you might want to wait before you inherit it. Okay, B tier can make good use of this weapon, but they are a bit slower. For these heroes, you're going to want to take advantage of their other stats to get big damage from their specials. For example, Lucas, Ephraim, and Obero want to run Bonfire builds, as it allows them to either engage and proc it on their second hit, or immediately retaliate with it if they are attacked. Here are a few builds you can try out with them. Ephraim's build is for a powerful defensive front line. It's going to allow him to retaliate with powerful bonfires, while the bulwark protects your back line and heals Ephraim up. Lucas's build is more of a fun nuke build that focuses on massive Ignis procs that will ignore damage reduction. And then finally, Fjorm has a defensive frontliner build as well, but this time taking advantage of her good resistance stat instead of defense. A tier is composed of infantry heroes that have a solid speed stat, but it's not as good as the heroes in S tier. They can run similar builds though. Just make sure to run the right special based off their stat line. And in S tier, we have infantry heroes who use the weapon best. First up is our 2 Lance Infantry Dancers. Both of these heroes can work amazingly well as Gale Force Dancers. Our first build is going to allow Azura to be able to one-tap Gale Force, meaning that she doesn't need to double, which makes it very consistent. If you can get Azura a pulse from Asker, Infantry Pulse, or some other effect, then you can drop Quicken Pulse for Blade Session to give her even more firepower. The second build is a more supportive Gale Force Dancer. This build lets Azura pulse down her allies, but she will need to double to activate her Gale Force. Also, don't worry about the premium skills, you can swap them around for whatever attack and speed boosting A skill you have. Now the fast Lance Infantry have a ton of different builds you can run depending on what you want to do. You can use one of the Gale Force builds I just showed too if you want. Our first build is an offensive Luna build that's going to allow Navarre to pop off with Lunas that deal an additional 10 true damage as well. Korn's build is if you want to go for an Omni Tank build. This build will stack up a good amount of damage reduction via Bio Astra, Velocity, and Speed Smoke 4. You could also put Alir's Close Call 4 if you want, but I really wouldn't recommend sacking her quite yet. Another option for a tanky frontliner build is Brave Lucina's. This build is going to focus on tanking through healing. Lucina will be able to pop Ether every combat as long as the foe can counterattack. She'll also get additional healing through Bulwark, and Speed Smoke 4 will offer a nice chunk of damage reduction. But for one of the most powerful options, you have to go with a Godlike Reflex build. You only want to use this on Lance heroes with extremely high speed though, as this does have a speed check built into it. Our first build is a self-sufficient one that allows the hero to pre-charge their own Godlike Reflexes, but it's not quite as strong. This build is for heroes who want to frontline, or for summoner duels while Might of Myriads is active as it grants distant counter. While the second build relies on allies to get the initial pre-charge of Godlike Reflexes for them, once it's pre-charged, you shouldn't have to worry about recharging it very much, as the special acceleration in the Arcane Lance can typically handle it. This build is extremely strong and is your best option for an Omni Tank build, as even Deadeye and Lethality cannot pierce through this damage reduction. Also feel free to switch around the B slots depending what you need. Skills like Bulwark or even Lull can work fine too. Lastly, we even have a fun Dragon Fang build. This is a pure player phase build if you want to see some big numbers while also piercing damage reduction due to Special Spiral 4. Surge Sparrow also allows you to heal a ton, which keeps the hero in the battle. This build can also work with Ignis or Glissies depending on the hero's stats. Now let's move on to our Flier tier list. Flyers and Cavalry heroes get extra efficiency or value with this weapon, as they will also be able to inherit Flow and Trace, which is a really good skill. So that's something to consider before inheriting as well. Now when it comes to Flyers, offensive stats are going to be the biggest determining factor, as speed allows for a pseudo no follow, and they also have synergy with flow skills. When it comes to Refine, there are a lot upcoming for Flyers, so you may want to wait for these heroes to get their Refines before you inherit the Arcane Lance. In C tier, we have heroes who are either slow or have a very low attack stat that holds them back. In B tier, we have heroes with middling speed, but good bulk, and decent attack. In A tier are our heroes with great stat lines, but are just barely outdone by the heroes in S tier. And finally in S tier, we have our Dancers. Flying Dancers are a great option for this weapon, as they can be amazing Gale Forcers in Ether raids. Not quite as good as Infantry, but still. We also have our Flyers with optimized stat lines, a majority of them being our new Flyer demotes. Our first build is a speedy option for Lorum. Because of how Clash works with Wings of Mercy, Lorum can cancel out any penalties to her attack and speed, warp in, kill an enemy, proc Gale Force, and then dance an ally as well. The second build is if you want a one-tap Gale Force for your Dancer. You're going to need some kind of pulse support for this build, so something like Asker can make it pretty easy. And then lastly, we have a full power Eldigan Gale Force build, just in case you need the damage to secure some kills. Our offensive Flyers have some great options for builds. This first build on Aranis is going to allow her to warp around destroying enemies with Luna, or she can even engage and then cancel away. The offensive no follow-up and Flow and Trace will ensure she can get her follow-up attack in player phase, which is really good against a ton of follow-up denial effects and defensive no follow-up in the game right now. Our second build is similar, but it's more focused on mixed phase. Speed Defense Near Trace does offer more stats than Flow and Trace, so if you want as many stats as possible, this will be the way to go. But in all honesty, I just use Flow and Trace unless you already have that skill on your hero. My third build is going to be a dive bomb build featuring Cordelia. She's going to be able to engage, smash the foe twice in a row, and proc a juicy Luna on the second hit. This is a really strong option for a player phase build, and if you don't have Clash, feel free to use a different attack and speed boosting A slot. Surge Sparrow can be a good option too, as it can offer healing and make sure the hero stays in dive bomb range. Our fourth build is going to be a Gale Force initiating build. This build is going to allow you to initiate on an odd turn, so you have 3 movement, zoom in, take out an enemy, and easily proc Gale Force due to Arcane Qiang's special acceleration. Flow and Trace also ensures your follow-up can't be denied, and you can even position perfectly thanks to the Trace skill. This is a very optimal build. The only thing to consider is how to ensure you get into Wings of Mercy range. The 5th build is for our quick, res-heavy flyers. This build makes good use of Pegasus Flight 4 off of Chloe. Fila is going to be able to spam icebergs on either her second attack or whenever a foe initiates. Pegasus Flight 4 is going to give her a ton of stats, which can not only help her deal more damage, but also fix up her defense stat a ton. Now there is a bit of overlap between Pegasus Flight 4 and the Arcane Lance, as they both have follow-up denial, but even so, this skill can be amazing on resistance heavy flyers. And our last build is going to be for the flyers with a ton of defense. This is a duelist build that will allow these heroes to almost always proc Bonfire every time in combat, which will deal devastating damage. Now let's move on to my Cavalry tier list. Heroes to look out for when it comes to refines include Dimitri, Conrad, Percival, and Ferdinand. Dimitri and Conrad are due for the refine extremely soon, so I would definitely wait before giving it to them. Cavalry heroes are in a similar situation to flyers as they get extra efficiency and value from the inheritance, as they can also pick up Flow and Trace. They're also going to want to focus on offensive stats. Unfortunately, C tier is full of cavalry heroes with slow or less than optimized stat lines. Heroes like Xander and Draken just have terrible stat lines, which drastically holds them back. While Berkut and Silas have heavy emphasis on defense, which is okay, but honestly not amazing. Typically, defensive cavs just don't perform well in our current meta. There is way too much damage being thrown around, either through easy access to specials or true damage. So in order to survive, you need more than just stats. You need either good damage reduction or defensive specials. And the follow-up denial in their weapon can be easily ignored with their low speed stat. In B tier, we have our cavalry with middling speed. It's good enough to get by, but it can be a hindrance against faster heroes. The lance can work well on these heroes, but you are going to want to take advantage of their defensive stats by using specials like Bonfire or Iceberg. And then in A tier, we have cavalry who all have the speed to do well with this weapon, but they are outdone by heroes in S tier who just have a better stat line. In S tier, we have Valentine's Owain, who uses this weapon exceptionally well. Ash and Sane, who have good weapons, but this weapon is better in most situations. And also notably Patrine, who is due for a refine in over a year, so if you can wait, don't give it to her, but if not, you'll definitely have some fun with her. My first set of builds is for slower or middling speed calves. Zeke is showing off a nice defensive duelist build that's going to focus on taking advantage of his massive defense stat to deal damage with bonfires. Matilda has a build that still focuses on speed stacking, but also makes use of her resistance stat to help her low attack stat. And Mathis is showing off a typical Gale Force Initiator build. Now Owain is showing off two of the builds that really stand out to me. First is an offensive nuke build that's going to ensure Owain can launch off 2 attacks with a Luna, and the second build is a speedy duelist build. This build is going to allow Owain to go in and fight and sustain himself with Ether, which he can proc in one round of combat as long as the opponent can counterattack. While Speed Smoke 4 will offer some damage reduction to help his survivability. Okay, let's finally move on to our armor tier list. Forsyth is due for a refine very soon, and Gatry has about a year before his, so you may want to wait depending on how patient you are. Now armors are in a bit of a weird situation. You either want to speed stack them a ton so they can deal with heroes like Brave Seliph or possibly Legendary Veronica, or you want to completely abandon speed and focus completely on defensive bulk. Now the reason for this is because the current armor meta revolves around Hardy Fighter, which does offer defensive no follow-up. That means as long as the opponent doesn't have no follow-up and outspeed you, they aren't doubling you. But in the case of most powerful nukes, they do tend to have NFU like Seliph or Veronica, and in that case you need to outspeed them, because if they double you, you're probably screwed. Also, because the Arcane Lance grants special acceleration, armors can easily use the more powerful defensive specials like Pavis or Aegis, which is very nice. With that in mind, we have Gwen alone in C tier. Her stat line is just abysmal, and I really can't recommend using her ever. In B tier, we have Effie, Lucas, and Valbar. Their stat lines are a bit outdated. They don't have the resistance to make it as a far saver, and as near savers, there are just better options, even if you aren't going for speed stacking build. In A tier, we have heroes who can do well, but aren't optimal. Winter Robin can perform decently as a speed stack near save, but he really needs every point of speed in order to survive. On the other hand, we have extremely bulky armors like Cervantes, who has a really good defense stat and okay speed. He can do well against slower opponents, and mostly should be used as a near saver, because his resistance stat isn't very good. Rudolph, Benny, and Forsyth have nice mixed bulk, so they can perform either far save or near save pretty well. And now in S tier we have Hilda, who can be a fantastic near saver. She has a very solid speed stat, so by stacking enough speed on her, she can take on threats like Brave Seliph quite comfortably. And then we have Surtur and Gatry, who are defensive juggernauts. These heroes can perform great as near or far save heroes with this weapon. Pirate Surtur already had a good weapon, but this one synergizes with Hardy Fighter way better. First up is going to be our speedy builds featuring Hilda. Our first build is going to be for Aether Raid's offense, near saving. This build is going to ensure Hilda has as much speed as possible, and also the Unity will protect her from debuffs, which is very important. If you can get guard from a hero like Kaden, that's also definitely appreciated, though Emblem might ruin your fun a bit. The second build is one for Aether Raid's defense. Steady Posture 3 will offer guard, which is very important for stopping Gale Force, while Deflect Melee will help against Summer Elgard or Brave Shenanigans from Winter Cordelia. You still want as much speed as possible, so you can deny follow-ups from popular Gale Forcers like Stealth and Brave Crawl. Lastly, we have a Farsight build for Aether Raid's offense. Honestly, it's not my favorite role for Hilda, as her resistance stat is a bit lacking, so if she does get doubled, she's gonna be in trouble. Moving on to our beefy boys, Pirate Surge's first build is an Aether Raid's offense build for near save. Close Defense 4 will ensure that opponents don't get buffs, which is relevant due to Seliph, and Surtur should be able to recharge Pavis in between attacks, to make him extra difficult to take down. Gatry has a nice near save build for Aether Raid's defense, once again, Stance 3 for the guard, and Deflect Melee for Summer Elgard. And then lastly, we have a Summoner Duels Far Save build. Gatry actually has a very solid resistance stat, which does help against AoEs. Also, this build runs decent defense 4 to help fight against Legendary Veronica, who is completely a nightmare to deal with in SD. Gatry can survive due to solid bulk and color advantage, but it's pretty close, so definitely try to give him as much support as possible. And with that, my Arcane tier list is complete. All 130 heroes ranked S to don't. I hope this video helped you decide who you want to inherit your Arcane Lance to, and possibly show you some cool builds along the way. Make sure to drop a comment down below, letting me know which Lance hero you will be inheriting the weapon to. Also, if you haven't yet, go check out Altina's Revenge, a cinematic showcase of Altina vs. VTubers. And if you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe. This has been Oblivion, I'll catch you all later.